the violence erupting in cities across France. Take a look at fires now breaking out earlier today as protesters and police fight in the streets of Paris. Hundreds of thousands of people taking part in these demonstrations for International Workers' Day, also known as May Day. Protesters still very unhappy about French President Emmanuel Macron's decision to raise France's retirement age from 62 to 64. ABC's Inez de Lucutara joins us from Paris now. So Inez, what are you seeing where you are right now?
Hey, Alexis. So this area appears to be clearing out a little bit, though there might be some clashes in just a moment. You can see over here there's a row of police officers behind me, and then back here, this is where the protesters have been, and you can see police officers are starting to move in to clear the crowds. That's a tactic they've been using time and time again. They kind of move in to try and disperse the crowds. We saw a number of clashes earlier today between police and protesters, with protesters hurling all sorts of objects at police. The streets right now littered with objects that were used to be thrown at police, and police firing back with stun grenade and tear gas. And we saw some policemen injured. We saw protesters also bloodied and injured. So a really violent scene today. We saw massive fires here. There was a building back there that was sending giant plumes of gray smoke into the sky. And we saw some fires also, just the trash cans that are being set on fires here. The protesters here are protesting pension reform. The government's plan to raise the minimum retirement age from 62 to 64. The law has passed. The protesters here are hoping that by continuing to protest, by continuing to cause some form of chaos, that the government will backtrack on that law. The government, though, has shown no indication that it is willing to backtrack. The French president argues that he doesn't have a choice. He's pointing to the changing demographics, the fact that people are living longer, and he says the system needs to be reformed and that the government will go in the red should the system stay as is. Protesters, though, point to the fact that, they argue that there are other ways to fund pensions, and they're pointing to things like taxing the rich, for instance. We were speaking with protesters here earlier, and one of the protesters was telling us he is saddened to see the streets of Paris in this state, to see fires being lit right in the heart of Paris, to see these clashes, to see people bloodied. But he feels that violence is the only way now. He feels that they've tried to protest peacefully and that they're not being heard, and so they're hoping that the government will now listen.
Do you expect these protests to go on beyond today, Labor Day, May 1st there? And also, I'm just curious, springtime in Paris, a big time for tourists. What does this all mean for the tourism industry at the moment?
Yes, the protesters have basically indicated that they have they're not planning on stopping anytime soon. They are vowing to continue protesting until the law is, pulled back, and until Macron backtracks on his proposal to reform pensions. They're pointing to an example in the past, and I think, you can see the police officers here starting to move in, so there might be some clashes there. But protesters here are pointing to an instance way back in the day where there was one law that was very controversial that passed, and protesters continued to take to the street, and the president at the time, President Chirac, did pull that law, and so that's what they're hoping for. They're hoping for a repeat of that. We should point out it's also that they're frustrated with the way Macron has gone about it here, so the fact that Macron used a procedure that was similar to executive action in the U.S., where he was able to bypass Parliament, pass the law without Parliament. Protesters feel that's anti-democratic, and so that's part of the frustration here. But they are vowing to keep protesting throughout the summer, and we've seen these types of protests pretty much every week, once a week. This one, of course, a little bit more violent than we've seen, but they are continuing to protest.
And what about reports that they're going to start using drones to film what's happening with the protesters? I know that these protests are happening in major cities across France, not just Paris, right? So tell us about the drones.
That's right, yeah. So it's cities across France, Paris, Lyon, Bordeaux, really all over the country, and they are starting to use drones. That's a very controversial tactic here. That's a first in France. It's never happened before. We haven't seen any drones being used today. Police say they're using drones to keep people safe, to keep an eye on the crowds, but protesters worry that it's a breach of their privacy. They're worried those images could be used against them to eventually arrest them, and so it's a very controversial topic. I will say, though, for our part, we haven't seen any drones being used today.
Yeah, we see police behind you on the move. Incredible video from there. Inez de Lucutara, thank you.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.